War of the Worlds, The Resurrection. A novel by J.M. Dillard. Chapter 6. The high-rise lobby, artfully decorated in rich hues of burgundy and peach, echoed with restrained laughter and the clink of crystal champagne flutes. Charlotte sat on the low couch next to a man. Fred, Harrison thought the name was, but he found the conversation too boring to follow it very closely. He slipped a finger between his neck and the uncomfortably tight, stiff collar, and tried in vain to loosen it a bit. Fred said something witty, and Char laughed, a silky, throaty sound. She was really in her element tonight, bright, witty, as sparkling as the diamonds and emeralds on her throat and ears. Harrison, uncomfortable in his new tuxedo, stood off to the side and smiled vaguely. She turned to Harrison. "Did I mention Fred worked for Bleecker Williams?" "No," Harrison said with a total lack of enthusiasm. He already knew where this conversation was going. "Mechanical engineer," Fred volunteered eagerly. Fred was a pleasant enough guy, but his only distinguishing feature were eyes set disturbingly close together. Harrison found he couldn't look at them for very long before his own eyes started to cross. "All very hush-hush," Fred was saying. "We've been lucky enough to get some lucrative defense contracts. Long hours, but I can't complain about the money." He peered through thick glasses at Harrison. "I understand you're an astrophysicist." "That's right." "Well," Fred leaned forward with a confidential air. "Let me just say this. Project we're working on could certainly use someone like you." DOD, huh? "If you mean Department of Defense, well, I can't name names." Harrison caught Charlotte's dismayed look, but said what he wanted to anyway. "No thanks." He kept his tone pleasantly conversational. "I guess I'm just one of those weirdos who thinks space should be peacefully explored instead of exploited as just another arena of war and politics and crass commercialization." Fred's round little face flushed red. Well, he stammered, "I suppose there's room for all kinds of opinions." "You mustn't pay any attention to him," Charlotte soothed, shooting Harrison a dirty look. She was about to say more, but was stopped by an Asian waiter in a white jacket who proffered flutes of champagne on a silver tray. Harrison took two and handed one to Charlotte and one to Fred, then turned and took the tray from the waiter and set it down on the coffee table. "Sir?" The waiter, a young, earnest-looking man, seemed confused. "Harrison Blackwood." He held out his hand to the waiter, who blushed and shyly took his hand. "Tuan Martin." He smiled sheepishly. "People usually aren't so friendly to me, Mr. Blackwood." "That's Dr. Charlotte began, but Harrison interrupted her. "Just Harrison." He held up an admonishing finger. "How's it going tonight, Tuan?" "Not so bad. If there's anything I can do for you—" "As a matter of fact, Tuan," he lowered his voice, "tell you what, I'll take that tray around for you, and you see if the kitchen has a Bud Light." Tuan shook his head. "I can't let you take the tray. I'd get into too much trouble, but I can sure find that beer for you." "Take your time," Harrison said. "We don't want you to get into trouble. Get it when you're finished unloading that tray." "Thanks, Harrison." Tuan flashed a bright smile before picking up the tray and moving on to the next group. Fred cleared his throat. So, Charlotte, how's your big sister?" "Fred used to date my sister Mimi." Charlotte tilted her face up at him. "I never forgave her for breaking up with him and marrying that orthodontist." Harrison said. "Tell you what, why don't I get the two of you something from the buffet?" "Gee, thanks, Blackwood," Fred cheered visibly. "Call me Harrison," he almost said from habit, but in Fred's case he made an exception. "My friends call me Harrison, but you can call me Dr. Blackwood." "No problem, Fred." Harrison wandered over to the huge buffet on the other side of the expansive lobby. Impressive spread. Char was mad for seafood, so he started heaping her plate: smoked salmon with capers, onions, and dill sauce, iced shrimp, oysters bien something or other. He found the vegetables and stuck a carrot stick into his mouth. An attractive silver-haired woman, straight and strong-looking, came up next to him, searching for a plate. Next to her stood an older man Harrison presumed was her husband. Harrison removed the carrot stick from his mouth and found a plate. Real china, of course, and very pretty. Shar would have been tempted to turn it over to read the name, but wouldn't risk doing so in public, and handed it to the silver-haired woman with a smile. "I hope the gentleman doesn't mind my saying so, but you're certainly looking very lovely this evening." She put a jeweled hand to her chest and gave an embarrassed little laugh. "Why, thank you. I don't believe we've met." She took the dish from him and extended her other hand. He switched the carrot to his left hand and shook hers with his right. "Marge Bleecker, and this is my husband, Howard." She nudged Howard, a portly, red-faced man who was squinting through black-rimmed glasses at a platter of oysters on the half-shell. "Howie, come meet this nice young man." "Harrison Blackwood," Harrison repeated, gripping the man's hand, and inclined his head toward Marge. "You're a lucky man, Howie." Howie and his wife beamed at each other with honest affection. "I certainly think so," Howie answered. "Are you enjoying our party?" "Ah, so you're the host. I'm having a great time. Absolutely great, thanks. Even the waiters are nice. You've got a good one working for you, Tuan Martin, who's going to get me a beer." "Oh, dear," Marge said. "I hope he isn't taking too long." "Not at all. Just left, as a matter of fact." Howie blinked at him. "So what's your line, Harrison? Frankly, I can't say I'm able to place the name right off the bat." "There's a good reason for that, Howie. We've never met. I'm an astrophysicist at the Pacific Institute. My fiancée, Charlotte Phillipson, decorated your office suites there." "And did a wonderful job, I must say," Marge gushed. "Doesn't it look gorgeous here tonight? These colors." But Howie was still on the same track. As he loaded oysters on the half-shell onto his plate, he said, "Astrophysicist, huh? You know, we could use someone in your field." Harrison smiled pleasantly. "Thanks, but I'm very happy where I am now." "I imagine so," Marge said. "I've heard of the Pacific Institute. Very prestigious." "At least it was before I started working there." They laughed politely. Behind them, someone in a shrill female voice called, "Howie, Marge, darling!" Marge rolled her eyes. "Sorry, Harrison, duty calls." She and Howie turned to greet a woman who wore a tiara and looked to Harrison like the spitting image of Madame Wellington. He stuck the carrot into the side of his mouth like a cigar and was loading a plate for Fred when Charlotte came up. Her tone was one of hushed awe. "Harrison," she laid a delicate hand on his forearm, "do you have any idea who you were just talking to?" "Yeah, Howie and Marge." He handed her the plate and started crunching on the carrot stick. She made a frustrated clicking sound with her tongue. "You're incorrigible, you know that? That was only Howard and Margaret Bleecker, a.k.a. Mr. and Mrs. CEO of Bleecker Williams Industries." He shrugged and popped the rest of the carrot into his mouth. Char's ability to be impressed by titles always amused him. Between crunches he said, "They'll always be Howie and Marge to me." "Harrison," she moaned, "be serious." Tuan reappeared, holding a frosted glass and a bottle. "Sorry it took so long, Harrison." "You back already? Thanks, Tuan. You're one in a million. All I need is the bottle." Harrison took it from him. "Charlotte Phillipson, Tuan Martin." Char's expression was glassy. "Charmed, I'm sure." "Pleased to meet you." Tuan bowed timidly and made his escape. Harrison took a swig of the bud. "Char, about the Bleeckers. You know I wouldn't say anything to embarrass you." She sighed and shook her head with affectionate disapproval. "I know that, darling. But it's not me we're talking about. Personally, I don't give a damn that you were rude to poor Fred back there, and I wouldn't give a damn if you stood on your head in the middle of the lobby right now." "You're beginning to sound like Rhett Butler." His lips curved in a smile. "Don't tempt me, Char." Ignoring him, she continued, "But these people can be very important to you if you'd ever agree to give up that ridiculous research you do and go into the private sector." Stunned, he said, "I like ridiculous research." All of a sudden, he got the point. He had thought they had an unspoken agreement. She was free to be Shar, with all of her silly social trappings, and in return he was free to be Harrison, with all of his idiosyncrasies. For the first time, it occurred to him that maybe he had misunderstood. Maybe she'd really been trying in her own way to manipulate him after all. No wonder she was so concerned about his meeting Howie and Marge. She had probably been planning on introducing him to them tonight. "I like rich desserts at fancy restaurants," Charlotte said a little too snottily, "but I don't make a career out of it." "Second thoughts about marrying a man who earns half what you do?" His bluntness made her back down just a little. This time her tone was gentler, conciliatory. "No, just trying to convince that man to live up to his potential." It was a standoff. They were glaring at each other when a different waiter approached. "Dr. Blackwood?" He turned. "I'm Harrison Blackwood." "Telephone, sir, if you'll follow me, please." "To be continued," he said to Charlotte, and handed her the beer bottle. "Hold this for me." Her mouth pursed, but she took it with a glint of amused, "I'll get you for this," in her eyes. Good old Shar, still a sport at least. He followed the waiter to a private telephone set up on a table in the corner. He picked up the receiver. "This is Harrison Blackwood." "Doc!" In his excitement, Norton shouted so loud Harrison was forced to hold the receiver out 3 inches from his ear. "Jesus, Norton, take it easy. What's going on?" "I'm still at the pits. You've got to get over here right away. Have I got something to show you?" "30 minutes later, Harrison stood with his hands on his hips in the doorway of Norton's office. "This had better be good, Norton. Char may never speak to me again, leaving in the middle of a very important party I didn't want to be in the first place." Norton sat, looking haggard but animated, behind a desk draped with unfolded computer printouts. "You ever get premonitions, Harrison?" His dark eyes glittered feverishly. "Norton, what the hell are you talking about?" Norton gathered up one of the printouts and thrust it at Harrison. "Here, got a fresh batch of radio intercepts I think you'll be interested in perusing." Harrison took the proffered sheets. Nothing unusual he could see, just the usual radio wave patterns they'd been encountering all along. He frowned and handed them back. "Norton, go get yourself some sleep. I've seen these patterns before, several times in fact." Norton grinned smugly. "No, Doc. You've seen these before." He gave Harrison a different printout. "Radio patterns collected from a point in space. The coordinates aren't important right now, off and on since we started this project." He gestured at the first printout Harrison still proffered. "Those patterns originated from a broadcast point on Earth." "Earth?" Harrison blinked at him, certain he'd misunderstood. "Are you sure?" Norton sniffed. "Of course I'm sure. That's why they pay me the big bucks." Harrison sank into the chair next to Norton's desk, trying to make sense of it all. "Impossible." "Of course it's impossible." Norton sounded exasperated. "That's why I yanked you from that party you didn't want to be at. Look here." He motioned for Harrison to give him the printouts. As soon as Norton had them, he spread them out, one above the other, so that both sets of wave patterns were visible. Harrison leaned closer to look at them as Norton traced a long brown finger over the repeated patterns. "Notice the parity?" He caught Harrison's puzzled frown and said, "Don't try to figure out the contents, Harrison. Just look at the patterns. That's a signal. That's a response. That's a response to the first response." Harrison understood. "And that's a response to the second response. My God!" He looked up at Norton's grinning face. "A communication. An honest-to-God communication." His lips curved upward. "On the money. I don't know how they did it, but those radio waves were boogieing. Talk about your subspace radio. Transmission and response all occurred within an afternoon's time. Either the military is up to something we don't know about, or we've got an uncomfortably close encounter here. Norton's focus shifted abruptly. Love your tux, by the way. Harrison grunted. Shar bought it for me. Right now I'm tempted to let you have it. He pulled off the bow tie and loosened the collar with a groan of relief. Ugh. Norton, let's be sure we're not just hallucinating. I want to see what the supercomputer says about this. Book time on the Cray. Priority time if you have to. Norton raised both hands, palms out. Whoa, Doc, slow down. You're talking megabucks here. How are we going to justify this to the penny pinchers? Harrison shrugged. The Cray's the best computer in the world, right? So don't ask me, ask it. Doc? Norton's tone softened. If it's what we think it is, I'm not sure how I feel. Half of me is thrilled beyond belief to find something out there, but the other half is terrified as hell. Don't say it, Harrison interrupted. If it's what it looks like, Norton, it's a good thing you're not in the mood to sleep. I need you to pinpoint the location of this first transmission. And when I do? Norton's expression was grim. Then by God, Harrison said, I'm going there to find out what it is. By morning, Norton's dark eyes were bloodshot. His lids fluttered. He slumped forward in his chair, his face on the verge of making contact with the map spread across his desk. Apparently, the entire pot of coffee he'd consumed at 3:30 no longer had any effect. The compass in his right hand slipped out with a faint clatter. Hovering over him, Harrison, fading himself after the first rush of adrenaline wore off, grasped Norton's shoulder and gave it a firm shake. Norton jerked his head up, his eyes wide, and drew a brown hand over his face. Jesus, man. He shook his head to clear the cobwebs. Harrison, I gotta get out of this place and bag some Z's. He squinted painfully at the brightening sky beyond the window. What time is it? 7:30, Harrison said. Damn it, Norton. I've missed 2 naps myself, but we're not leaving until you give me what I want. Norton's lip curled. Study your history, Doc. Slave driver mentality never worked. But he picked up his compass and bent over the map again. Because, thought Harrison, he understands that if there's any chance of it being them, then we have so very little time. There. Norton triumphantly handed the plot map of the southwestern United States to Harrison. The location of the transmissions. Now, let me pass out in peace. Harrison stared at it, transfixed. Norton had circled a desolate spot in the desert, close enough for Harrison to get there in the Bronco in a matter of several hours. It would probably take most of the day to get there. He'd need to pack a bag first, take a nap. But time was of the essence. Scrap the nap. He'd just have to try to stay awake somehow. Harrison staggered toward the door. You're welcome, Norton croaked, indignant. Any time, no problem. But there was no time to respond. Harrison hurried out into the parking lot, nose buried in the map. Good morning, someone said. He mumbled something into the map. It took him 3 full strides to recognize the voice. He lowered the map and turned to look behind him. Suzanne McCullough was staring at him with a puzzled expression. Navy pinstripe dress today. For crying out loud, why did the woman always look as if she were on her way to an East Coast power breakfast? Have they changed the dress code at the Institute? She asked, sounding amused at the point he remembered he was still wearing the tuxedo. Pack a bag, he told her before he realized he was going to. We're taking a trip. She could drive while he slept. He'd just have to make sure not to let her get too close if things started to look dangerous. And who knew, maybe this was just the thing to convince her of the project's importance. She blinked, her mouth dropped open a bit. We are? Why? Won't know that till we get there, he said.